So now that we've discussed all of the amazing accomplishments of Rosalynn Carter, right, and we've set the context of speaking up for women's rights, equal rights, mental health, I'm going to go ahead, we're going to move into our next incredible woman who essentially is doing this side by side with First Lady Rosalynn Carter. More than sure that she and Rosalynn have crossed paths. But now we're going to move into the Coretta Scott King. It's so funny. There's a part of me that oh my gosh, I just want to honorarily deem Coretta Scott King's like American royalty or Queen Coretta, just because seriously, this woman's life, she accomplished so much. A singer, an orator, an activist, a visionary, writer, and icon. Coretta was born in the heart of Dixie and destined to become a legend. With a voice like birdsong and a mind sharp as iron, Coretta was always destined to be that girl. And she set a precedent for women such as myself and others to follow in her footsteps. Now, Coretta was educated at private school at Lincoln High School in Marion, Alabama. And graduating at the top of her class, Coretta would accomplish becoming choir director at age 15, earning a musical scholarship to one of the best conservatories in the country, and lead the charge alongside her husband, Dr. Martin Luther King, as well as after his passing, to essentially what would impact desegregation policies for years to come. And so kind of remember where we are, right? As I kind of mentioned before, all this is happening essentially late 1927s, right in the heart of the 60s and 70s. So again, you're coming into Jim Crow South, equal rights, Vietnam War is happening and the fallout of that, Great Depression, right? So all of these essentially big movement impact change. And these women are right at the heart of it all. While my co-host and I are essentially talking about Coretta, we're going to just be talking a little bit about Coretta's upbringing. You're going to get to learn about her childhood, early influences of Coretta, and essentially what would allow her to become one of the greatest leaders of all time. I am so honored to have you here, Dr. Matrice, discussing the legendary Coretta Scott King. And if you would mind just giving a brief, overview, introduction of yourself, whatever you like to share.
Okay, thank you for having me. I am Darkova Matrice, originally Georgia Peach. I was born here in Atlanta at Crawford Long Hospital. I matriculated through the Atlanta public school system at John Wesley Dobbs Elementary School and then Fulton High School. I earned my bachelor's degree from Morris Brown College, and that started my background, foundational principles to enter the noble field of education. I have been in education for about 28 years. I'm just glad to be here to share some of the information that I have gathered in hopes of just being the light for someone else.
And I'm so incredibly excited to have you here. No, seriously, listeners, Dr. Darkova Matrice has been a huge influence in my life. And you know, it's like rare now. It shouldn't be, but it's really rare to find somebody who's born and raised here in Atlanta. And while the woman who we're covering today isn't, her accomplishments impacted Atlanta in such a way that I know I didn't know, even, coming from growing up being here. Dr. Matrice, that's why I had to have you on, kind of give us a little bit of insight, context in regards to what Atlanta looked like at that time and kind of what life was like for Black Americans in Atlanta. in that time. So
yes, so growing up, our home was in Thomasville, and so there's a clear distinction between Thomasville, the projects, and Thomasville, the homes. And I didn't realize that, growing up. I was just happy to be with my family. But I do know that there was a clear distinction. People will say, oh, you're in Thomasville homes. And that appeared to be that you like kind of had some things together. So shout out to my parents, look, because
Right.
they always worked to make sure that my sister and I, was well protected and, had the best. I mean, we thought we were rich, so,
Right.
had the best of everything. So thank you to Tommy King III and Bais Brown King. So our home on Grange Drive was at the corner of Grange Drive and Lathrop, and it was like the house to be at. We had 2 stories, so we had the upstairs and then we had the basement that my dad had finished. He put the shellac, the cement, in the backyard, so we were one of the only homes in the neighborhood that had a basketball court. So everybody wanted to come to our house. They would be there playing basketball. My dad, who's also, and I know we're talking about Coretta, but my dad was a staple in the community because although he had 2 girls, all of my cousins are guys. And so he took on the honors of being the football coach at Thomasville Recreation Center. And so there are guys who still come to him today who still talk to him on Facebook and ask me, how's my coach? Because he was that guy. He was everybody's father.
Right.
So growing up in Atlanta was definitely, when I reflect, was a positive thing that helped me to become who I am, because I was always surrounded by people, movers and shakers, who would get in the mix of things. And it wasn't just about sitting back and complaining about what we didn't have or how things should be. They got into the trenches and they did the work to feed the people, to educate the people, and then to make a difference.
So, well, that's incredibly cool.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, I know that had to will shape who you are today. But it's interesting that you mentioned your dad's place in the community, because it does kind of tie into Coretta, because she writes about in her biography, both of her parents were entrepreneurs. And her father, I believe, owned a store in their hometown of Alabama. But he too kind of just became this very essential factor for the community to be able to go to when they needed what they needed, or when they didn't have what they needed. And she just talks a lot about kind of part of her tenacity, her growth, her ability to really also just be out there in the trenches.
Yes.
So as you're kind of, so that was your home, that's your home, like you grew up.
Right. And look, it's a very rare thing. I went to the same elementary school, let me start off. I went to Hoggerbrooks Academy, because my birthday September 24th. So my parents were going to make sure I started kindergarten, because, you had to turn 5 by, I think it was September the 2nd. So if I didn't go to a private school, I would have had to sit out a year. So I did private school, kindergarten, and 1st grade at Hoggerbrooks Academy. And then from 2nd grade to 7th grade, which is also the historical part, that's when I went to elementary school. This was before they brought in the middle schools. So elementary school was 2nd grade through 7th grade. And then high school was 8th through 12th. And I stayed at the same school. I went to Dobbs the entire time. I went to Fulton my entire high school career. So, I think that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Now. Look, especially with all this NIL stuff going on, you kind of just, if you don't like it, you move, you change, and you switch. But my parents were committed to making sure we had that stability, that we had that stability and consistency.
And so high school years now, can you like, I'm just curious, what does Atlanta kind of look like, right? I guess through like your lens, through like a Black lens, like what were some of the, I don't know, kind of maybe some of the cultural kind of moments?
Yes. Okay. So, just to set the stage, my sister is 5 years older than I am. So she went to Fulton. She went to Dobbs and Fulton. So I'm coming to Fulton High School as Mr. King's daughter and Michelle King's little sister. That was who I was. And then that was in their mind was going to set the foundation for us to be able to go into the world and be successful. So you had all of these people. My parents were just two people, but I can think back to my elementary school principal, Miss Snowden, and the high school principal, Bessie McLemore. Like, they knew that in order for us as a community to make any kind of gains, like education was the key. And it was also important to be respectful and to be well-rounded. So, and then so when you step outside of the school, the next thing was church. And that was every Sunday. We're going to Sunday school. We're going to church. You're in the choir. I was never an usher, but my sister was. But you were on the usher board. Again, we were encouraged to be involved. And then my parents made sure we did all the field trips, that we were able to explore the Atlanta Zoo. We were able, to go downtown to the High Museum of Art. It was a big deal to go to the symphony. Alvin Ailey came to town. Everybody was getting dressed up, to go see Alvin Ailey. I remember there was one, this is when stage plays, seemed like to me they were like the beginning of them. There was one called Your Arms Too Short, Your Arms Too Short to Box with God. And that was, we were again encouraged to get the academics, but also to develop some type of cultural sense of what's going on in Atlanta.
Yeah. So, right. So that's amazing. So you mentioned the High, you mentioned the Atlanta Zoo, and then this is 90s, essentially,
Right.
Like late
80s,
kind of early 90s. So in the historic context of the kings of like Dr. King and Coretta, he had passed. Civil rights segregation is, legally.
Yeah, legally. Great way. Yes.
Has come to an end. But I say all this because I'm curious. So Atlanta, and we today kind of continue to have this thing, right, of like, we're the Black Mecca. We're the Black base of the South. Atlanta has always been the place where if you're Black, you can make it. Not that you can speak for everything. But I just, I'm just curious if your parents kind of ever shared with you and your sister, moments of segregation, or if that was ever felt like, not segregation per se, but if everything in the context of racism, separate prejudices, because we know legally it ended, but of course it still functions, it still operates.
Right.
So I know I just asked you a mouthful, but
so there's this thing people would say, and like people would say that our parents sheltered us because there was a lot that we did not know. Like, I didn't know about segregation. I didn't know that we didn't have the equal rights. Now, of course, I had great teachers, and the
Right.
teachers would kind of mention, but it was so far away from my world,
Right.
So my parents definitely wanted to, just kind of tap into our mindset and help us to, and encourage us to know that, my mom would say all the time, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do.
Okay.
And like, it didn't matter about all of those outside
people. So got it. So removed enough to where you knew of it in passing, but but like the effects of it, your parents worked hard to make. It was more focus on you.
Focus on what I can do what I can do to make the difference that I can make. Now, once I went to Morris Brown and got that wonderful experience from an HBCU, I'm completely immersed in everything Atlanta, everything black people, so everything pride. And so that was, even though my high school was my elementary and high school were majority black. And then to go to Morris Brown, this was the key. I saw the difference when I worked on my master's degree at Oglethorpe University. And this is my first experience where I'm the only black girl in the class. And so this is when, it's kind of like everything is pedagogical. You read about this stuff, but right here, this is when I get to apply it, because literally, and I didn't ask for it, but I was the spokesperson for black people in that environment. And so this is when I got, okay, this is why I remember all the greats. And this is, and you don't want to have to name drop, but at that time, I'm educating as much as I'm working. I'm trying to get my own education. Right. I have to educate the people around me. I decided to own that. Yes. To just, because a lot of them had not had experiences with black people. And again, all of this is Atlanta. So Oglethorpe is up Peachtree. Right. So, you get a little bit further from the hood. Right. And they've never been, they don't know Thomasville.
Right. Exactly, because Thomasville, as well as, and I do want to go back to like your days at Morris Brown just a bit, but and I can say myself, like, even I've experienced this. Atlanta, I think, kind of operates in a natural segregation. And by that I mean,
well stated. Yeah. Well stated.
And just in the sense of, so there are parts inner city where absolutely it's black excellence, prominence. We know Auburn Avenue was like Black Wall Street. Yes. So inner city, you had those things. But like part of what I've discovered last year and this year was, pre all of that. I mean, even pre like the King. So right when you're coming like Reconstruction area, basically early 1900s, Atlanta's like white. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Like hardcore, Gone with the Wind, all of that. And so presumably shifts happen, and white people move out into the burbs, and it makes space for us to thrive. You remember kind of like Coretta Scott King, like kind of first really like.
Yes. I remember reading a book about Coretta Scott King, and this was I guess late elementary, so 7th grade. We knew that the King Center was now in full effect. I had been to the center on a field trip, so we learned all about Dr. King. And then my 7th grade teacher, Miss Gleason, thought it was necessary to introduce us to Coretta Scott King. And that's when initially the bells started ringing. Well, there's somebody else that kind of works with him. And because I could see how my parents worked together, my mother definitely was an outspoken mother, outspoken wife. I'm thinking Coretta seems she seems a little bit more behind the scenes. As I move into high school and then college, I'm learning, behind the scenes is really where everything happens, behind the scenes is where it happens. And so I'm able to come back and think, okay, so she's the one who initiated that we establish this legacy. Because we know Dr. King and we know what he's done, but she initiates, we need this space that's going to be a museum for him. And And so again, I'm thinking, okay, so she's working behind the scenes with all the officiants. And again, now I realize it's a time when you really kind of don't really want to listen to women because, you know, men are dominant. And so she has to figure out how to maneuver through and play the game, and then instill raising the children. Right. You know, that's a story all on its own, you know, to be able to be the support that he needs, the listening ear that he needs her to be. So she needs to be everything that the children need.
Yes.
On top of you're getting death threats and crosses, burning crosses in your yard. So I'm just like amazed at her resilience as a Black woman in Atlanta, in the South, and still, you know, staying focused to the assignment, right, to the assignment at hand. So when like there was a progression of me understanding who Coretta Scott King was, but initially it came from, you know, just reading a book about, because our elementary teachers, they did an excellent job presenting the information. And it's kind of like in life, you're presented with information, but everything has to align and click. Absolutely. When you kind of get it. And so I had all of these things to build up for me to really truly realize her greatness.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. And same, like, you learn about her, but it is most of the time, it's always in correlation to, you know, Dr. King.
Exactly.
And yeah, sometimes it wasn't until I visited the King Center, I want to say a few years ago, and they have an entire section right, dedicated to her, right, that I was like, again, finally, you know, yes. Oh, and right. But it's like, right. Why aren't we talking about, I mean, numerous accomplishments from, you know, like you said, everything from like, so the Freedom concerts, you know, that she would hold, because she was an incredible singer, like she studied music. Right. All the way to, of course, assisting with organizing a lot of the Freedom Ride buses. The sit-ins.
Telling somebody that I was getting ready to do this podcast with you. And so, you know, what I like to do is just kind of survey the people. And what do you know? What do you think? What do you remember? And I heard over and over and over, oh, she's like the ultimate ride or die. She's the ultimate ride or die. And I'm like, you know what? She was.
She really was. I mean, and she writes about, in her biography, the times when he was gone, their home, you know, bombing, and still, like you said, having to be, I mean, because their children are young. Right. Right. And that kind of just made me think of like motherhood in the movement. Right. You know, which is an entirely separate thing on its own.
It's a podcast all by itself.
It's a podcast by itself. But
because as women, once we realize, and I think we know it early, you're kind of given a lot of responsibilities to lead and to create and to initiate, and it becomes just second nature. That's what we do. Yep. You know, and so, now we have a baby. So yeah, you got to, I mean, I'm responsible for making sure this child has all of the things that she's supposed to have so that she can be successful.
Well, and as I understand it, like, you know, Coretta also got kind of pulled into a lot of things, also by way of like Martin, but just like so one of the things that like she always kind of like talks about, and that was very important to her, was her sense of self-worth and understanding, like, I am chosen to. Right, because she's talking about like these conversations that they're having, and you know how he knew he had a clear destiny and a path, but Coretta, and it was instilled from her mother, right, that she's like, I'm chosen just as much as you are. I have my own duty. And like you said, I kind of had my own assignment to stick to. So like she, I believe, goes to Geneva to speak on behalf, right, of women's rights, which brings me, because you said something earlier that really struck me when you said her having to like find her voice and stick to resilience in a time when women's voices weren't really. So is that something that you two kind of avidly kind of remember, or just kind of like a remembrance of men, back then, being...
Well, I think on a larger scale, yes, it seemed like the men were the people who were in charge and making decisions. But then somehow I get to always come back to my own world that my parents created for us. And then I knew that, no, I get to speak to. What I have to say is valuable. And it's kind of like, now that I'm thinking, it's kind of like a balancing act. You're trying to figure out, like, how much do I say? Because even today, 2025, you got a black woman who speaks. She's either assertive or aggressive, depending on the perspective or the perception of who's watching.
Right.
And so that's a fine line that we walk. But at some point you get to where you have to just go inside and know, as Coretta, has guided us to this point where you realize what I have to say, what I feel is valuable, is necessary, is worthy. So here you go.
Right. And to think like she, as we all do, like, had to step over into that, or else people wouldn't take her serious.
Right.
You know
Exactly.
What I mean? So
exactly.
She had to take a hard stance.
Right. And then it's just, I can see images when you was talking about her, her doing her speaking engagements and things. For so long, it was just Dr. King giving the speeches. Dr. King is giving the speech. Dr. King is giving the speech. But as you said, you go back to who she is. She was already in school. Like, she was doing her own thing. She was getting her college. Did she get her degree?
She did.
She did. Okay, so she earned her degree in music. I think it was music education.
Yes.
Right. And so she had a sense of being before Dr. King.
Yes.
And so, it's just a matter of, okay, we're married now.
Right.
So, you do that yielding thing, and what's the important thing at this moment?
Exactly.
At this moment, what is important for us, for me, for my family, and for our people.
Right.
And I think that she, made that ultimate sacrifice to encourage him, to help him, to build him, because it was ultimately, going to benefit her.
Right.
At some point as well.
Right.
So, you don't have to always bump heads. You just, you have to sit down and you have to.
Was there anything kind of about her, or kind of just anything that she did, or maybe just like seeing her that like really inspired you, or that you heard about, or maybe your friends or family kind of, talked about, like Coretta in this?
Right. So the thing that really, I guess, impressed or made an impression upon me about Coretta Scott King was her poise, was her demeanor. Like, I don't ever recall just seeing her being loud. I don't recall her just like getting out of character. And so that's one thing that I can say I admire about her. I know people go behind closed doors and they do whatever they need to do. Right. But whenever she was front and center, or they got a glimpse of her, she was always just like focused. And so that's the thing that I can take. And so you kind of wonder, how much did she know about her impact? About the effect that she was having. Because again, when we're in leadership positions, yes, you want to get everybody on board to believe what it is that you're saying, to join what the movement that you're on, but people are watching you beyond what you say. They're watching the way that you move, watching the way that you live. And so you can talk all day about it's wonderful being a black woman in Atlanta, but if you don't look like it, and I know a lot of times those of us who believe in God, we know that He will allow us to look real great, and there's a lot of things going on, turmoil on the inside. But I think that's, and I can only attribute it to Atlanta, to the South. Like that's what we own. We know that. I mean, things can be really, really, really messed up, but we're able to find something positive in the situation. We're able to shift that focus,
right?
And say, okay, well, this is not going so well, but let's talk about what is going right. And let's kind of push that narrative. And so I'm thinking that she may have what is obvious, that's the way that she lived, that's the way that she carried herself. And so that's the impression that I have of Coretta. Just just kind of cool, calm, and collected.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that, like, I agree with you. It's like that was almost like her brand. Mm-hmm. And what's funny about that is, but I like just kind of keep going back to her biography. It's incredible. Everybody, I do recommend if you can get your hands on it, please do. But like she talks about growing up, like being a bit of a tomboy. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, right. Like she talks about roughhousing with her cousins. And in one sentence, she literally classifies herself as mean. But her mother, understandably, was like, that is not going to serve you well,
right. And see, that's the beautiful thing, I guess. Again, when I'm talking about just owning all of you, like that's a choice, because I realize, and my parents would tell me all the time, like, you have to look at what do you have to lose. Like, she's already there. Right. There's nothing she does. You're the one who won't, and this is what I would tell my daughters, because they
exactly. And I think and for Coretta, exactly right. Her being kind of curved into like that is part of what, like, I think made people try to pick at her, because like you said, she's giving so grace face.
Right. Exactly.
It's kind of like, how can I, and like you said, I mean, you can only imagine the type of rooms that she's in, the situation she's in the presence of like her enemies, people that viciously want to see her and Martin.
Absolutely.
And so to keep that composure, I think she just mastered weaponizing it in a way. And like you said, like, I'm not gonna let you yank me. And especially, I think, iron steel. Once she lost, Dr. King.
Absolutely.
Because to spear, like, I don't think people, I know myself, don't even like realize, like, to spearhead an entire project of cementing your husband's legacy in the King Center as a national holiday.
Right. Yes, all of those things. So it was kind of like, even after his death, seems like she probably had even more. I'm not gonna say to prove, because we ain't got to prove nothing, but sometimes we got to prove to put it in stone. This is who I always said I was. This is who he said this is who he was, and this is what he said he was going to do, and this is what he did.
So, as we kind of wind down and keeping kind of in theme with what you've already mentioned before, right, in regards to Coretta's influence. And if you need me to clarify, I totally will. But just like, are there any favorite Coretta like moments that you were like, that maybe that you kind of like remember? And by that I mean, so like to kind of like give just like some context or maybe like some background. So in addition to her look, like, I know her doing like the Freedom concerts. I think it's like a big cool one that I just kind of like think of, right, because it ties back into her singing roots. So if it was like seeing images of her or kind of anything like that, you have just any favorite?
Yes, there's actually one favorite image that comes to mind. It was a black and white picture, and it was her at, I'm thinking it was Dr. King's funeral. She's sitting down, and one of the baby girls is laying in her lap. And she kind of turns, and the cameraman gets that image. I know she wasn't posing, for the picture, but again, that poise always, comes through. But that's the image that I carry of Coretta Scott King, because I'm thinking in that moment, that's like a pivotal period for her. She could have very well decided, okay, Dr. King, he has passed, his legacy is what it is. Now I'm going to go ahead and be a regular person, or I'm going to go ahead and do something different. I'm going to go ahead and be a music teacher. You know, she could have very well decided then. Or she's sitting there and she has the baby girl in her lap, and it's like, you know, what am I going to tell my children? What am I going to tell my children? Because they're young. Of course they have experiences, but they're young. Like, what do they need to know about their dad? Furthermore, what do they need to know about me? Because I'm the one that's here. So yes, that image is prominent for me, because that's that crossroad. That's that time when she has to decide, going back to Atlanta, going back to the South, like, how am I going to reinvent myself? What am I going to do next? Right. And you know what? I also want to suggest that a lot of times when we're, it's not until we go through adversities that we realize how significant and how beautiful they are, because those are the life-changing moments, the makings. That's the things that make you who you are. And so we get to embrace those times as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matrice. Woo! I didn't bring any tissues. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is
but good. Thank you so much for being here with me today, and sharing everything. You've been like incredible, a wealth of information, and I just hope you all enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.